love how sometimes we're led into perspective. We get surrounded by so many things that just draw our attention and distract us in many ways, but yet sometimes when we're just drawn in the presence of God with worship, praise does something. I don't know, praise releases things in a person's life, and so often I find myself finding more things to complain about than to really be thankful. And I've started to do this. I'm not there yet, but I've started to do this. When I'm starting to feel anxiety, when I'm starting to feel pressure, when I'm starting to feel like it's just coming apart at the seams and I can't grab it in time and it just seems to run away with me, I'm starting to learn that when I start feeling that way, I start praising. And I start just giving thanks for the opportunities and the things that I do have and what I do enjoy. I try to change my perspective of that of gratitude rather than waiting for the next thing to happen. And praise does something. It just releases something in us. And I don't know about you, but I think there's far more opportunities for us to express our gratitude to what God has done than look at our circumstances and wait for something to happen. I want to learn, church, to be more aware of what I've been given and what I have and what is in my spiritual bank account. I want to be more aware of that than anything else around me, because when I'm focused on the things that are around me, and I'm telling you, it's easy to focus on things that are around you. There's distractions, there's all those things that just take us off of our focus, and sometimes we have control of it and sometimes we don't. But man, when we can turn around and start praising and start giving thanks for what we have, I'm learning that, and it's really affecting my attitude. It's really affecting how I face things and go through things. Am I there yet? No, I'm still learning. And I think when we sang this song, Be Lifted Up, when I was singing it in a way that I want God to be lifted above my problems and my struggles. I want Him to be lifted above all my questions and my thoughts and my struggles. I want Him to be lifted up, because I know when He's lifted up, then my perspective changes, because then I see things from His perspective. When I see things from His perspective, it changes everything about mine. I don't know if you struggle with that in your life, but this morning I want to talk about the power of perspective. I don't know about you, but sometimes I can wake up in the morning and I don't feel like doing absolutely anything. Nothing. I feel like the world is against me. I feel like no matter what I do, no matter what I say, no matter what I touch, it just seems to fall apart all the time right in front of me. And sometimes I'm defeated before I even get going in the day. And no coffee doesn't help. Perspective. Then you run into somebody that's just all smiley and happy and the world is great, and you think, well, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? Perspective is powerful. I learned something, or I am learning something. Perspective is so important, because when we have the right perspective, it changes our life. Perspective has a neat thing to it. When we have a perspective from heaven, when we have God's perspective, it's amazing how everything around us starts flipping over. And all of a sudden, for the first time, we walk on level ground when it seemed to be so hilly, so rocky, and you wonder where your next step was. Perspective turns that around and gives us a platform that we can start walking on, even though it may not look like that in our reality. But there's a greater reality inside of us. And I want to draw from that greater reality. I want to draw from deep inside where God speaks, I can do it. When God speaks, you are able to overcome. I want to draw deep down where God says, it isn't impossible. You can accomplish it. You have what it takes. I want to deep down and dig those things out, because stuff on the surface, it just doesn't seem, it just distracts me. There's an interesting situation in 2 Kings chapter 6 where there's a story there that I want to read this morning on a springboard off of how powerful perspective is. And in 2 Kings chapter 6, there's a situation in Israel's history where they had a lot of enemies. And those enemies were constantly always planning to attack Israel and take territory away or siege their cities and just wanting to raise havoc in their life. And so in 2 Kings chapter 6, we have one of those situations where Israel was again under threat by their enemies around them. And the interesting thing in this chapter in the Old Testament is whenever the enemies planned to strategize to attack Israel, God revealed it to a prophet named Elisha. And Elisha was hearing what was going on even though he wasn't there. God was communicating that to him. And so what Elisha was doing was telling the king of Israel what the plans of their enemies were. And so then the Israeli king would just reroute things and change things. And all of a sudden, the enemy's king was beginning to recognize a pattern. And he went to his troops and said, one of you guys are a snitch. One of you are revealing the plans that I'm making so that we can attack yours. One of you are. Ever been in a situation like that where you just think that there's someone on the inside revealing stuff that's making my life miserable? So the king decided he was going to find out who it was, and he started calling out people, and all of a sudden they realized it's none of them. It was actually a prophet named Elisha. He was hearing what was going on, and he was revealing that plan. So in 2 Kings chapter 6, the king had the ideas, find out where Elisha is, we'll send our troops, surround that city, and we'll snatch him. The interesting thing is, as this plan was happening, it picks it up and starting in verse 14, and I'm going to read it there for you in verse 14. It starts by saying in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 14, so one night the king of Am sent his great army with chariots and horses and surrounded the city. So they had found where Elisha was. When the servant of the man of God got up early the next morning and went outside, there were troops, there were horses, there were chariots everywhere. Notice how he responds. Oh, sir, what will we do now? Just picture it for a moment. How many of you are morning people? God bless you. I am not a morning person. I like to stay up till 2 o'clock at night and wake up at 12 noon. That would be my sweet spot. I'm not interested in sunsets. I'm interested in nice rest and relaxing and not doing anything until I'm ready to do something. And that's usually by noon, but that doesn't happen. Getting up first thing in the morning, before you turn the coffee on. You step outside on your nice deck or your hotel we were sitting at, let's say, and all of a sudden you realize, and you look and you go, holy moly. Your entire place is surrounded, not just by a couple of people. We're talking about a vast army of chariots, horses, and soldiers everywhere. And so that's what happened here. And that's why he said, oh, sir, what will we do now? You see, when we read it, we don't get the expression, but if you really understand it, he was in a panic. In a panic. The young man cried to Elisha. And then verse 16, I like verse 16. 16 is awesome because it says, Elisha gets up in that same time frame in the morning and says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, Elisha told him. And then he says this, listen to this, for there are more on our side than theirs. Then Elisha, verse 17, prayed, O Lord, open the eyes and let him see. And then the Lord opened his young man's eyes, and when he looked up, he saw the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. You see, I want to talk about the power of perspective because we have two characters in this chapter that both had a different perspective. The first one was overwhelmed at what he saw. The first one could not comprehend how in the world they were going to get out of that situation that they were in. You have a person here that was overwhelmed because what he saw was impossible. What he saw was lights out. And yet we have another character here that's seen the very same circumstances and yet had a very different perspective. Instead of one of holy moly or ha, woo, ah, he had don't be afraid. You know what's interesting, when I study in the New Testament, it's amazing to me how many times Jesus had to tell the people around him not to be afraid. Many, many times throughout the New Testament, Jesus had to tell people, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Why? Because he had a perspective that was larger than life, and he could see the beginning and the end, and he knew at that end we would always win, and so he was always telling people, you don't have to be afraid. Always challenging the people around them to change their perspective, because when we have his perspective, everything around us changes. And so here we have in this story, in this illustration, we have Elisha that had a perspective, and he told his servant not to worry. Not to worry, because there was more with them than there were against them. How hard is it to change your perspective mid-course? I don't know about you, but sometimes I think we can relate to the fact that sometimes when we start going down there, it's almost like a river. We just can't stop. And yet we can stop. We are able to take shifts in our life. And Elisha began to say, hey, listen, there's more. And then he asked God to open his eyes. And I love that phrase. I love that phrase what he says in verse 17. And Elijah prayed. He said, open his eyes and let him see. Oh, man, folks, if we understand that there's more to the scenario, there's more to the picture, there's more to the circumstances than we recognize. And what Elijah was saying is, Lord, open his eyes to see the real picture. And when he seen the picture, it was like, oh, that's not a big deal at all. Let's keep drinking coffee. We're covered. We're safe because of a perspective change. There's three things that I want to leave you this morning why I believe perspective is important. And they come out of my own wrestling with other people and having their testimony share. I share three principles of why perspective is important. The first thing that I want to tell you this morning is perspective is important because it brings proper balance. Whenever we have a wrong perspective, all of us can relate to being in situations like that. Our life is lopsided. It's all but trouble. Everything is going down. Everything is going wrong. Everything is coming against us. We don't know where to turn, what to think about sometimes. Sometimes it can be so overwhelming that we just get lost in it. So what perspective does is it brings proper balance. It brings the other side into focus so that we can see we're not as bad off as we think we are. And in fact, when we have God's perspective, we begin to see that the things are to our advantage way more than we first recognize. I don't know if you understand that, but I'm saying we're in process and learning that aspect and how we don't have to give up. We can just step back and reload because we realize that there's more for us than against us. It brings proper balance. I like this word. I wrote this down. It says it levels the playing field. You ever feel like when you show up somewhere, maybe you don't, that you think the advantage is always against you? You may not feel that in particular, but sometimes you think that. Having a right perspective levels the playing field. How we respond to worry and panic is different when we have a correct perspective. I want to say this, we've never, ever been meant to live in panic. Never. We're not designed for that. Why? Because victory is ours. Victory is always ours. But yet sometimes I can't grasp hold of it. Because it's about perspective. You change, listen to this, you change a person's perspective, you change the direction of their life.
That's right.
You do. Because we live, for the most part, we live out of what we believe. We live what we believe. And so we went, I don't believe that. And yet our lifestyle shows we live out what we believe. So the greatest way to change a person's life, our own life, is how we think and how we look at things. Why is it that you can get up in the morning, let's go back to that again, get up in the morning and your significant other is beside you, and yet you can have a horrible outlook at life and the person right next to you can look and anticipate great things? It's just perspective. Changing perspective, we change our life. It brings proper balance. Let me bring you to the second thing. I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly because I have an illustration that I really want to drive home my point. Second, it brings a healthy way of dealing with things. It helps us in making right decision. It helps us have more to work with before we jump into stuff. How many of us have jumped into things and went later on, oh man, I wish I would have just waited a little bit. My life is often like that. If I just had waited just 5 minutes, I would have had a little more to work with and I would have a better decision. I'm glad God is not impatient with us and just writes us off and thinks, oh, well, you tried, it's over now. I'm glad he doesn't do that because he's committed to the process of us developing into the people he's called us to be. He's committed to the process of developing in us the people that he's designed us to be. Perspective. Brings a healthy way of dealing with things. How many times have you made a quick decision and out of reaction because of how you're feeling and your emotions? Man, I tell you, one of the hardest things to do is make decisions when you're very emotionally high. Man, we make so many decisions in life sometimes when we should just take a step back and breathe a little bit. The second thing, it brings a healthy way of dealing with things. It helps us make the right decisions. The third thing that I want to leave with you this morning is it brings life to our journey. Perspective brings life to our journey. Too many times we're caught up in the problems and the frustrations that we can't control or we think we control, and we walk through life disappointed and frustrated and wondering why life is so difficult. I'm telling you, when you have the proper perspective, it brings life to the journey. I don't know about you, but I'm attracted to life. So much of my life for years was always negativity and death and just can't overcome and these things. And man, when I hear life, it empowers us. Life not only empowers us, but it brings hope to a situation that we once thought was hopeless. It's all about perspective. Sometimes we pray, Lord, change these circumstances. If only I had a break like this person did. If only I could have this miracle that I'm so needing so badly. Why doesn't God understand where I'm at? And he does, because he knows the weapon that we have inside of us is changing our perspective, and then we see things from another angle, and from that angle, we begin to have life. I'm telling you, church, we are people of life. We are people of hope. We are people of anticipating great things. We are people that are going to live on the side of victory, even though the battle we're in, we might get defeated. We stand back up and it doesn't matter, we've already won. How deflating is it to always face an enemy where you know you will always win? Sometimes you might have some wipeouts and they think, but you stand back up again and you look at the board, you always have more points. It breathes life. I don't know about you, but when I look around our world and our society, one of the things that's getting sucked out is life. And we're trying to find it in all kinds of things. Hear me. We're trying to find it in success. We're trying to find it in relationships. We're trying to find it in money. We're trying to find it in all these things that temporarily bring that life. But when reality hits and the struggles come, all of a sudden what we thought was our answer becomes our problem. Because it's never enough. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's never enough. We have to have more of it. We need to now go even harder with it. And all of a sudden, it gives a little bit of joy. And it's, okay, yeah, we're back there again. But then it shifts again. And then we're looking for it more. And before we know it, we realize we're living a life of bondage rather than freedom. I'm telling you, we are called and designed by God to live for freedom. And when we find him and he fulfills all the voids in our life, he fulfills all those things that we've been trying to achieve. Jesus alone can fill that void in our life to give us everything we need to succeed in this world. The powerful reality is every one of us here in this room has the potential to transform the world you're in because of what you carry inside of you. So let's dig deep through our circumstances and events. Let's start digging deep. Let's call it out in other people. You're greater than that. You have what it takes. I know it looks difficult, but let me come around you and say it's not difficult. We're going to walk with you. We're going to walk with you because we want to dig out the treasures that God's put in there. And sometimes we don't take the time to recognize what God's all given us. And I'm telling you, if we would begin to understand and unpack the things that God's put in us, we would never have a room to complain. We'd have never room to be disappointed. We would be living from one step to the next step, anticipating what God's going to do. And I'm looking at people that have that potential this morning. I'm looking at the people with that potential. It brings life. I don't know about you, but let's get back to the passage for 1 minute. Look what happens here. He says, don't be afraid in verse 16. Don't be afraid, for there are more on our side than on theirs. Now, if you would stop right there, I can just picture the argument. You're crazy. I just came from out there. I don't think you understand what I'm saying, Elisha. I don't think you get it, because when I stepped out, we were surrounded. When I stepped out, I seen horses as far as I could see. I see not only that, Elisha, but you know what? I also seen chariots. And chariots carry a lot of things that we don't want to mess around with. And I seen soldiers. What do you mean don't be afraid? You just don't get reality. You just don't get reality. That's just life. You're going to have to grin it and bear it. How many have heard that before? Just make the best of it. God's not after perfection. You just need to try harder. Boy, I've heard those words many times. He says, don't be afraid, for there are more on our side and theirs. And the interesting thing here, church, is this. Until Elisha's servant's eyes were open, he did not see. We've got to learn to be patient with people that don't see. We've got to be patient with people that don't see. What did Elisha say? Come on, open your eyes, man. How more obvious can it be? What did he say? He said, you know what? I'm going to help you see. God opened his eyes. God opened his eyes, and then he'll see and he'll recognize. And God opened his eyes, and he's seen God's horses and his chariots of fire. All of a sudden, the perspective was switched. All of a sudden, church, he had balance. All of a sudden, he had a healthy way of looking at the situation. All of a sudden, he had life. Life. And the situation changed. I won't take time to read further, but I just want to make that point. When you have a clear perspective, you can learn to maneuver around those obstacles and those things that pose as threat, and you can have peace and clarity and understanding no matter what the situation. That's how powerful perspective is. That's how powerful perspective is. I think one time I used a pair of sunglasses. I had a pair of colored sunglasses up here, and I used the illustration about it. When you put those sunglasses on, you see through those lenses. And if it's yellow, you see everything yellow. But you just wear them for a while, and all of a sudden, you see that yellow seems to disappear. It becomes natural until you take those glasses off. And all of a sudden, your eyes have to adjust. It's like, oh, there was a difference. That's how powerful perspective is. I did something yesterday, is I made a visit to the police station, not because I was in trouble. But I went to the police station, and they had a set of tools that they teach people of how impairment affects you. And that impairment does a lot of funny things, because what those goggles do is they're designed to give you a perspective. That's what they are. They're designed to give you a perspective. And it's amazing how you adjust your life based on those perspectives. So what I want to do, I want to have one volunteer. In the military, we call it voluntold if no one answers or no one does. And I want to demonstrate for you in the next 5-6 minutes how powerful perspective is. Dean, you may as well take your hat off, because you're going to have to put these on. What I want you to do is, right now you have a clear perspective. I want you to walk through these cones, just like this, and make your way through, and go at a normal pace. Just, you have right perspective, so you don't have to walk slow. You can just go through. See, you need to give him a hand because he's volunteered himself. Okay? See, it's amazing. He's navigating through those obstacles with no issues. Why? Because of his perspective. Now let's say we change his perspective and watch the difference that it takes. Are you getting this? Is this okay? I'll walk beside you so that you don't completely fall off the stage. Okay. Dean has a perspective. Listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to me. You're Elisha's servants. You're Elisha's servants. Holy moly, we're in trouble. Here's Elisha's servant. Now make your way through the cones. I won't let you fall. So this is the way. No, come on, we got to clap his hands. Come on. You went way faster before. You went way faster before. Yeah, there you know. No. It's your perspective. Okay, there's the one.
This is legit.
A little faster, because we want to finish the service, and the slower you are, the longer they're going to wait. And so, yeah, keep on going. Keep on going. Yeah, there you go. Keep on going. There you go. Oh, hit the cone there. Okay, now you have to make your way down the stairs, okay? Yeah, no, I'll hold you. Just don't worry. It's okay. Now take them off. When we watch that, it's easy. It's easy. Like you just go between the cones. Like, how hard can that be? But when you have a wrong perspective, you live according to what you see. I'm telling you, folks, there's more in you than you are even out, that you know that is in you. It's a change of perspective. That's all it is, a change of perspective. I even have a crazier one. Crazier one. Elijah, would you dare to try a crazy one? All right. This one's for free. Go through the cones first without. You got a clear perspective. Clear perspective.
Good luck, brother.
There's a set of 4 or 5 of these, all at different levels of impairment to show the difference of impairment. And so what he had is probably mid-range. What this one here is extreme. And it'll be entertaining to watch. It will. Again, showing perspective. How we see, we live. All right, buddy. You're going to have to make your eyes adjust a little bit. Maybe I should get you to start here. Why not here? That way then, if you do trip.
Go down a couple of stairs.
Yeah. We'll go this way, and I promise I'll be very close to you, because get your eyes used to that.
Oh, gosh.
Just take a few minutes in the Lord, in Jesus' name.
This is the actual worst.
It is the worst. Okay. All right. Give her.
If I just run?
You're going to wipe it.
Terrible idea. Wow. And look, I don't even know.
Okay, you're missing a bunch of cones.
Am I?
Yeah, you are. You got to go that way. You got to go that way.
Uh-oh.
There you go. Watch the edge.
You know, if I just close my eyes, I feel a
No.
lot better.
Oh, I know you do.
Where am I going?
You're going to go straight.
Okay.
Okay, now you're going to turn a little bit. There you go.
This is the scary part.
Yeah.
I see the step. I know it's there. It feels like it's 10 feet away. Oh, jeez. Okay.
Awesome.
That is terrible.
Can I end it off with just saying this? How do we get right perspective? How do we get right perspective? Three things. First of all, we have to understand the facts. You see, so often our life is we just understand our circumstances. We have to understand the facts. There's always more to the story than we're reading. Understand the facts. The facts were, in this situation, they were vastly outnumbered because God was bigger than anything else around them. Those were the facts. And what happened is Elisha's servant adjusted himself. He adjusted himself based on the facts. The hardest thing to do is to make the decisions based on emotion. And sometimes, to help that, we bring other people into our life. Look, I'm not seeing this correctly. This is all I see. I've had that happen to me many times where people said, that's not true. That's not the big picture. That's how you feel right now. That's how you want to respond. But that's not the reality. The reality is much bigger. Let me tell you, this. And it's like, okay, now we're getting a bigger picture. We have to understand the facts. Take the time, folks, to believe in people that you can trust to help you in your process, because you and I are not going to always see it correctly. Understand the facts. The second thing, how to get perspective, is don't let feelings control you. Amen. Don't let feelings control you. The third thing, and I said this already because I didn't realize that I had written it down, invite others that you trust into the conversation, because they will always see from a different vantage point. When you're in the midst of something, that's all you see. But when there are others around you, they can see a brighter picture, and they can tell you that's not all what you see. Amen? Amen. Amen. Let's pray.